All right. Welcome to another episode of the Aetherica podcast.
Woo!
Podcast for the modern philosopher magician. I'm Sky Mathis today, joined with Ike Baker. How's it going,
Howdy.
Ike?
Good. I'm very, very happy that we're here together doing this again. It's been too long. I almost been like 2 weeks since we said
It has. You've been a busy man, as usual, burning the midnight candle.
That's right. We don't use oil here. I have wax candles.
Nice. Working on amazing things, though, that will soon come to fruition. So tonight we're going to talk a little Dion Fortune. Going to get into a couple books in particular, the Mystical Qabalah, as well as the Circuit of Force. So maybe probably to open up, I know that we've touched a little bit on her background, who she was before, but I guess it'd probably be good just to give a brief overview of that before we get into the subject matter.
Sure. Oh, you want me to do that?
I mean, I could try, but don't think I would do it any justice.
Yeah. Well, I think I've said it before on this podcast. I consider Dion Fortune to be a teacher from beyond the grave. And I don't necessarily mean that in the, Isaac Lurian sense of the word, where I'm communicating with her dead spirit. I just she's early on in my trajectory within initiatic societies, specifically the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Her work was something that I studied very closely. I think I've read like 21 of her books, and so I value her work extremely highly. Like, look, she was a human being, right? The work isn't perfect. There is no such thing as perfect work. But I would say that the information, the insight that she was available to combine with sort of the Kabbalistic, Hermetic Kabbalistic, magical Kabbalistic systems of her day was absolutely brilliant. So she was a early 20th century initiate of the Alpha and Omega, and she was an author and a practitioner of lay psychiatry or psychology. So there was a period when psychology was such a new field of study, and it was like sort of trying to get mainstream acceptance, at least within the academic institutions, as a proper science, a proper field of study, that it didn't just kind of appear fully formed on the scene, and they were just giving classes about it. There were lay practitioners. There was no licensing. You could just learn about it through a couple of books and start practicing and collecting money, which I feel like that's basically what self-help is now. These, Instagram influencers who are telling you about, love and light, and calling every like literally creating this narcissist boogeyman that's out there. Everyone's a narcissist. If everyone else is a narcissist, guess who the fucking narcissist is? But anyway, it was kind of like that. So it was like the Wild West, but she involved herself heavily in that, something that she studied and that she did for several years. And she was also a friend to and associate of Israel Regardie, who we all know, another initiate living in London for a time. I believe he actually stayed with her and her husband for a little while. But they were both practitioners of psychology, and they both, through the works of, Carl Jung, obviously Freud was like the big guy. I want to say, I'm forgetting his name. There was one more dude who was like tremendously influential in the occult, from his sort of work in psychology. If I remember it, I'll shout his name out later. But they were influenced by his work, and they did a tremendous amount of work to psychologize or frame within a psychological context a lot of the Kabbalistic, the Kabbalistic models that were the underlying basis for their orders and their work, which wasn't done before that. It really wasn't in the early the founders of the Hermetic Order, the Golden Dawn. They were still looking at things in a very, very, well, I will say, less scientific way. Now, here's the thing, what that produces via the New Age and via our sort of like postmodern positivistic skepticism is a completely psychologized version of magic. That's not what they were doing. They weren't saying that these things are psychological and ancient peoples just they mythologized psychology. That's not what they were saying. They were saying psychology is definitely a part of it, right? Because that is subsumed within the soul, within the spiritual organism of the being. Of course it's a part. It's like, just because my hand is material doesn't mean it's not a part of everything that I am, so, but there is more. There's more than just my right hand. And so that was extremely influential. And Dion Fortune, so she was an initiate of the Alpha et Omega. She was kicked out by Moina Mathers. She channeled a document in her, I want to say, her early 20s. It was called the Cosmic Doctrine, and it didn't get released until after she died, or maybe just later on in her life. But she didn't channel it and then release it. And when you read it, it's extremely baffling, and you kind of see that she's using Theosophical, right? That's where a lot of this stuff came from. That's why these initiates were attempting to like use scientific terminology and graft these things, or not graft, because it's not artificial, it's not arbitrary. They were understanding, they were realizing the consonances, the correlation of one thing to another, because part of it was a lack of scientific vernacular in ancient times, but there were also spiritual things, that was also a component. But during the end of the 1700s and throughout the 1800s, right around the end of the 1800s, and going into the 20th century, fin de siècle, London and Paris, you had the Theosophical Society, and towards the end of the or I want to say the middle of the 1800s. But what was also going on was this burgeoning new scientific community that was being, by way of Enlightenment, positivism, being really shuttled very quickly into the mainstream in general, not just because you also have to understand the mainstream was very different back then. There was still a tremendous division between the working class and there is now too, but there were still kids working in factories and stuff like that. I guess there are now too in certain parts of the world, but I would say the literate mainstream that had really power to accept or reject ideas. They were being, they were very quickly consuming and accepting and sort of converting everything to the burgeoning scientific terminology and worldview. The perspective lens basically took over then. And it's just been tightening its grip around our neck like a fucking anaconda ever since then. There is such a thing as too much of a good thing. But so they were trying to compete with this. Everybody knew the world had changed completely, the Industrial Revolution, and things were just radically different. The world was changing, world government, you know, you had the Bolshevik revolutions and Karl Marx and all this sort of stuff, and the, you know, monarchy being deposed, you know, Tsar Nicholas and his family, you know, slaughtered, and just an overturn. You know, there was the French Revolution and the American Revolution that happened 100 years or so before. So the world was changing, and a lot of these people really knew that, and they were attempting to be a part of this new world and vie for prominence within the sphere of public ideas and identity and ideology. So that's when you see, you know, the Theosophical Society kind of. I wouldn't say that it happened so much with Blavatsky. I mean, yeah, she definitely set the tone. But with Besant and even Alice Bailey, and especially with Leadbeater, seeing his stuff on the chakras and his stuff on the etheric body, you know, there's one other guy too. I forget his name. I want to say it's like Powell or something, but it just gets very like pseudoscientific. Like looking back at it, you're just like, ooh, no, that didn't age. You know, it just didn't. And so Dion Fortune was a young intellectual in the beginning of the 1900s. And, you know, obviously for a woman, right, to be engaged in a lot of this stuff and talk, you know, lay psychology, she was really at the forefront of I want to say, in, you know, the frontiers of the exploration of consciousness in every possible way, spiritual, scientific. But she channeled this work called the Cosmic Doctrine that sounds a lot like Theosophical stuff. Particularly, it resembles the stanzas of Jan that are in the beginning of Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine. And it's basically a cosmogonical model that has various really, so in Blavatsky's translation, well, I mean, we don't have the extant documents. She claims that that these documents were found in like a cave in Tibet in some, you know, monastery, whereas we don't have those documents. You know, she just claims to have translated them. They used a lot of abstract Eastern vernacular mixed with this kind of pseudoscientific language, very, very kind of mystical. And you see that in the Cosmic Doctrine that that Dion Fortune supposedly channeled, but she throws in, you know, they were using Greek terms, you know, I would say Christian theological terms, Neoplatonic, cosmological theoplatonic terms like logos, logoi, and that's logos in the plural. They were throwing those things in there too, but at the same time, they were talking about corpuscles and talking about atoms. And so it's a very strange thing to read, to be honest with you. It's not my favorite. It's hands down, it's my least favorite of her work. And I think truly it was the least inspired. I think a lot of that had to do with the fact she was very young when she channeled it.
Yeah.
But essentially she showed it to Moina Mathers, and Moina Mathers was like, what is this? What do you want me to do with this? Kind of thing. And it led to this fight and this argument. And Dion Fortune, she kind of says it without saying it, but everybody knows, in a book called Psychic Self-Defense, towards the end, I believe, she recounts this tale of basically Moina Mathers like astrally attacking her. So she split with that. And then I believe at some point she was in the Stella Matutina. That's how she got in touch with Israel Regardie, who was a member of the Bristol Temple for a little while. So she was an initiate within that milieu, specifically the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn transmission, right? Because those are the two splinter orders, the Alpha and Omega and the Stella Matutina. She was in both of them. But she started writing books. She started her own, she moved to Glastonbury and started her own initiatic order and mystery school type of thing called Fraternity of the Inner Light that was later renamed to Society of the Inner Light. And she embodied or she incorporated a lot of the Arthurian mythos. She was a huge proponent of, okay, what's your ethnic background? Okay, whatever they're doing there, if you can't move there and study it, then go somewhere like it and study that. She was very much about getting in the stream, realigning with ancestral traditions, ancestral places. And so for her, that was, British, Celtic, the Arthurian mythos. And so that's why she moved to Glastonbury. Obviously, there's a, well, that's assumed, but it makes sense that she would move to Glastonbury and set up shop there because that's, the supposed island of Avalon, according to legend and stuff like that. But she was also involved in, she wrote a lot. I mean, for the Society of Inner Light, she had a periodical that went out where she would write articles on everything for the various initiates in her school. And that's where the book, The Circuit of Force, comes from. She basically started a rolling column, I guess you could call it, a regular column, and released a series of articles called The Circuit of Force. And then her student, Gareth Knight, he posthumously collected them and added some commentary and published them as The Circuit of Force. Her big work, though, was the Mystical Qabalah. And to this day, that is a classic. That is a classic of that era. It's one of the most reliable books for occultism. And then the last thing that I want to say about her is that, well, two things. She, during World War II and the Blitzkrieg, the bombing of London by the Germans across the English Channel, she gathered a group of initiates and they did some magical work in an effort to combat that, which was very interesting. I'm not saying one way or another. I'm just saying we have the papers of them meeting. I think there's a book about it, but it was like mantra work. It was visualization, things like this. And, much to everybody's surprise, Germany never invaded England. Now that could be to like political ties, right? Because the monarchy of England are Germans. They changed their name after World War I from the Saxe-Coburgs to the Windsors, but they're Germans. The rulers of the United Kingdom are German. They're not English. But so who knows? Could have had something to do with that. I don't really know. It can only speculate. But and then the last thing is that well, shit, I completely forgot. So let's what do you think about everything I just said?
I think it's beautiful. I think that's a great overview. There was a question. This is like kind of an off-topic thing from Dion Fortune, but still kind of related because we're talking about Blavatsky and like the Theosophy of Blavatsky and all of that. And you mentioned like a little bit, which made me think of these thoughts. Like with her Theosophy, would you consider it along any like Luciferian lines, or was she just kind of utilizing that word and that term in the sense of like light and illumination? Like some people will talk about and draw correlations with this sort of esoteric illumination of Lucifer leading to the inspiration of like the United Nations with Blavatsky. And there's like this perspective that Theosophy sought like a universal world initiation of sorts and would restore like ritualism and
no, absolutely not.
Like this.
Absolutely not. Blavatsky was against ritual.
Mm-hmm.
She basically said, yes, are there adepts? Absolutely. Do they practice? Do they have what we would call, magical powers, CDs? Absolutely. Is that you? Fuck no. Are you going to do that? No. Do I recommend the practice of magic? Absolutely not. That's why the Golden Dawn, Westcott and Mathers, also working with Anna Kingsford, who was much more hermetic, much more Western. Blavatsky relocated the locus of the source, the seed ground of Western occultism. She reoriented it. For many, many years. It was Egypt, it was Greece, it was Alexandria, it was Athens, it was Syria. She moved it all the way the fuck to India, and said, no, 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 this is where your traditions come from. She was very anti-Christian, but I want to say not against Christ, against Christians. I wouldn't say that she was adversarial in a way that was like polemical. She wasn't telling people going out to like protest Christianity, but she'd like poke fun at them as basically like sheeple. And she was not really wrong, but in a lot of instances, especially at her place and time. But everybody wants to paint everybody else as a fucking spy, because it's much more interesting for people to think that there has to be, from our worldview, from our perspective, the way that we can't, it's incapable of most people to, for most people to step out of the world we live in and realize that all of this, there are some similarities, but people were not like this for most of history. You see it in the things they did, the things they built, the things they said, the things they wrote. The things they gave us that we now have that we can't understand, so we need to dismantle them like a fucking toy I can't get to work. That's so, I don't care, about what evidence people say. Well, we know she was a spy. You don't know shit. You don't know anything. You have to study the work and meet that on its own. How could somebody be as passionately prolific? I mean, look at this. This is the secret doctrine. This is her second, but she ran a society. She wrote this massive tome. You know what I'm saying? And I don't even know if this is abridged. I know that most, like, people come to me and they're like, oh yeah, I read Isis Unveiled. You definitely didn't. Because it's like 5 volumes. You read the abridged version, the one that's this big, but Isis Unveiled is bigger than this. So but they sell it abridged because people can't read like that anymore. And so the thing is, most people, when they talk about Lucifer then and now, no fucking clue. No clue what they're talking about, because it's something people ran wild with. That's all it is. It's just, I'm not one to say, well, if it's in the Bible, then there is no spirituality to it, because these people were just, I'm not one of these, socialist inclining postmodern atheists, positivists, literalists who have to reduce everything down to some sort of fucking power struggle. People meant things. People believed in things, before us. And I mean, if you can't understand that, I feel sorry for you. Being completely devoid of any passion and understanding of your subjective experience and the validity of that, but the Luciferian thing is weird. I mean, you see it in Pike, you see Crowley, I think, talks about it. You see, Blavatsky named, like, the Theosophical Journal for a long time was just Lucifer magazine. But they looked at it in the context of light bringer, light bearer. It was not a satanic conflation. She didn't think Satan was the savior. She just didn't think Lucifer was Satan. And that was true also. Levy talked about that, but he's another one where it's like, you can barely make heads or tails of, like, I would say 60% of the things that he was writing, because it was so cryptic and sensational, and there was no other writing like it at the time. It was like one person came out of the woodwork and started talking about this secret world, this secret society, and the secret practice. And he claimed to have been a part of it. And behind him was this impenetrable wall. You can't see what's behind the wall. I've been behind the wall. I can't tell you everything I've seen behind the wall, but I'll tell you a little bit about what I've seen behind the wall. And so then you read his books and you're just like, what the fuck does any of this mean? I've been an occultist. I've been studying this stuff for 20 years, and I still look at Levy and I'm like, some of it's like really solid. Some of it's brilliant. Some of it is like, you can tell he's writing between the lines, but some of it is it's just downright. I feel like he used this cryptic voice to hide things or areas that he didn't know anything about. I think that I don't think his knowledge was quote unquote perfect. So I think he hid that behind a lot these veils of, he might have been, at a certain point in his initiatic trajectory where he had been given symbols and he had studied symbols, but it hadn't been revealed to him. He hadn't had the revelation of the larger meaning. And, but you're a young man and you're a journalist and you decide to go write, 3 books, 2 books on this stuff. But I guess, that's the price you pay for putting your stuff out there. But the Luciferian thing, it comes from the book of Isaiah, where essentially the prophet Isaiah is denouncing a king of Babylon. And he calls him, well, in the original Hebrew, it's Hallel, the light bearer, having to do with an epithet of the king, because all the lines leading up to that are talking about a king of Babylon and how he's gonna fall because he has oppressed, the Israelites, the Hebrew people. And he talks about that. And at a certain point, he says, oh, how far you've fallen, Hillel, in the Greek. So in Hellenistic Egypt, there were Jews, lots of them, huge community. And from that period of Platonic influence in Egypt and in Hebrew communities, we derive, or what emerged really as a consequence, was Hellenistic Judaism. And Hellenistic Judaism gave us 2 really important things for the Western esoteric tradition. It gave us Merkaba mysticism, and it gave us the Septuagint. And the Septuagint are the 70 books that were translated from Hebrew to Greek at that point. And so it gets translated from Hallel, meaning like shining one, to Eosphoros to Proi, which means like dawn bringer of or light bringer of the morning, really. Dawn bringer, really, because Eos is dawn, right? That was the goddess of dawn. Dawn light of the morning, Eosphoros to Proi. But that then later gets translated to the Latin Vulgate version of the Old Testament as Lucifer, light bearer, and due largely to unfortunately, doctors of the church and saints, really, like Augustine of Hippo was a big one, and there are others that started this hermeneutical, which means, exegetical. Hermeneutics is basically interpretation of the Bible. They started this hermeneutical sort of narrative that Lucifer was a passage referring to Satan, but the thing is that it was reverse engineered. So here's 2 points of interest. In the second letter of Peter, the apostle Peter, right? That was like who would become the first pope. He refers to Christ in the Vulgate as Lucifer, light bearer. It's an epithet for Jesus. So there's 2 completely different because it's not a name. It's a word, it's a title, it's a descriptor. That they're just, it's interchangeable. Like if I call you, hey guy, that doesn't mean that you're the only guy,
right?
That's not your name, you're Sky.
Yes.
And so if somebody else mentions Guy, they're like, oh wait, I know him. It's not the same thing.
Yeah.
And so then another important point is that the entire reason it gets conflated with Satan is this. In the book of, right, because in the Old Testament, Satan is kind of like this prosecutor in the court of El. He's an adversary and he's an accuser. That's what that word means, shaitan. Accuser, adversary. And that's what he does. Especially you look at the book of Job and things like that. In the New Testament, book of Revelation, written by St. John the Divine in a cave on Patmos, the Greek island, right? In exile. He writes this book of Revelation, which is basically his vision of the future and the second coming of Christ and everything that has to happen before that. And it's terrifying. Christ didn't say any of this, according to the gospel. Christ speaks to St. John the Divine through Revelation, but it's not a canonical gospel. It's not speaking of Jesus while he was alive. His life and works. Granted, none of the gospels were written when Jesus was alive, but it's a completely different species of text, the book of Revelation. And in that book, it describes Satan's fall from heaven. That's where like the wars of the angels are really conflated with Satan being an angel kind of falling and being cast out of heaven and all this stuff. So essentially the issue with that is that it's anachronistic. It's a retrofitting. It's saying like, oh yeah, Satan was a fallen angel. That's who he was. But these books were written, 500, 600, 700 years before we had that interpretation of who and what Satan was. So how are we going back and now what mental gymnastics are we playing to kind of, pull this one fucking line that is very clearly talking about a king, a living king with an actual kingdom, and now just pulling a line. So this is where this shit can get really hairy. And right, how much paranoia, how much wasted time has this whole Luciferian thing, created. So when you're getting involved in the occult, you that's why you need to take an erudite path as well. You need to study the history and the hermeneutics and the literature just as much as you practice.
Yeah. And that's exactly why I keep bringing it up, because I want to drill it into people's heads.
You've got a personal vendetta against somebody, don't you?
Well, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and in, these days when people are talking about esoteric subject matters from uninitiated perspectives, are just they're just stringing together and picking little tidbits out of all different kinds of sources to create whatever narrative they have or they're trying to form, and they don't usually back it up with any actual valid points. They kind of just gloss over everything, and then they hit these like hot button keywords that get people emotionally triggered, and then lump these things in, lump certain terms in with certain people, and draw all these conclusions about this is what the occult is, and that's part of the problem. And one of the things that drives me crazy, because it gives and it paints a bad image, and it doesn't represent the actual wholeness of what these things are. So I don't know, I just always like to get you to get hyped up on that stuff.
Yeah, you know how to push my buttons. No, but the thing is that it's great, right? It's great that you are open to this, right? Because I've been on a lot of podcasts and done a lot of writing, and there are people in the comments section who are like, he's one of them, he's lying. It's
Yep.
like it's a whole like cover job that I'm
Yeah.
doing. I don't get paid to do any of this shit. You know what I'm saying? I'm losing money. So it's like, why am I gonna waste my time trying to make shit up? I'm in the same position you are, where the whole reason I decided to pipe up was because like of how wrong a lot of people have it, and that's fine, right? But the clincher is how vocal they are,
Yes.
and the size of their audience. Now here's the other side of the coin though about Lucifer. There's a certain occult sort of doctrine that says when you create a thought form, right? They're called in I think Dzogchen, they call them tulpas. When you create a thought form, and that thing is a mixture of astral and etheric energy, which is to say subtle physical energy and a mental image, right? That's not to say that it's fake. That's another issue that people have. I don't talk about it as the imagination. I call it the imaginal faculty. It's a spiritual power, and people don't realize it's happening in a dimension that is coterminal. It's coexistent and interpenetrative with all this stuff, but we don't experience it as physical until it manifests. Then we experience it as physical, but it's an actuality. The great line in Harry Potter when Harry dies and he looks at Dumbledore and like this, and for any people that don't know Harry Potter and aren't going to understand what I'm about to say, go watch the movie. Don't talk to me until you have. They're amazing, but
Yes, they are.
particularly if you know magic. But there's a point where Harry dies and he's talking to the spirit of his mentor, and he says, "Is this all? Is this real, or is this happening in my head?" And he says, "My dear boy, of course it's happening in your head, but why should that mean that it isn't real?" So that's the crux of magic, and we don't mean that in a poetic way. These have actual existences that are non-physical. People who can embrace that just have the mental wherewithal to be able to embrace the idea that, hey, maybe there are things, certainly I know there are things that I cannot explain with the positivistic materialistic paradigm. You can't explain most things, so we limit our discussion to things that we can, and that makes us comfortable. But when you really look at the breadth of lived experience that is recorded and attested, it's way more than we're willing to talk about, because we can't explain it. We can't fit it into our neat little paradigm, and too fucking bad. I think we're really getting to the point now where, like, yeah, it's cliche and it's a meme, but I agree with it. If the truth sets it on fire, then let it fucking burn.
Indeed. All right. A couple terms that I've come across in reading, or not so much reading, kind of just skimming through Dion Fortune, Prakriti and Purusha. What are these terms and what do they refer to?
So, Prakriti, I believe, is matter, physical matter. I forget what Purusha is. I remember the Purusha Sukta, but I don't remember what that word Okay. So I get it now. So I know Prakriti is sort of the Vedic, or I guess they would call it like Sanskrit word for physical matter. And Prakriti is right, it's the same thing in every elemental or ontological cosmology. It changes. It's the same thing in the Platonic stuff. If it can change, it's not real. What is changeless and what is deathless, that's our philosophical definition of reality. And anything that doesn't meet those criterion, and what that needs, what it means, that it needs to not be existent within time. It has to be outside of time, because time is evidence of change. That's all it is. It doesn't actually exist. Time is the way that our 5 sense limited consciousness, bound to the material vessel and fooled by the illusions of Prakriti, experiences change. In reality, time is an anomaly. We cannot go backwards and we cannot go forwards in it as a tool of measurement. We can only be now. And that's the only thing that exists, the ever-present now. That's very Eastern, but it's also fucking true. I don't care if it doesn't fit neatly into the Western paradigm. And in fact, it does in the Neoplatonic philosophy of Plotinus. But, and likely his teacher, Ammoniasakas. But so the reality of eternity requires no change, and changeless, and therefore deathless. And so that is Purusha. Purusha is the changeless, whereas Prakriti is the material, which is constantly changing. And these are words that I mean, I've probably, like, when I first got into this stuff, that's all there was, the Eastern words and vernacular and stuff. But since then, the good thing is that because I went so deep and really did my best to understand it, and I had like decent teachers, at least of the philosophy, when I did start delving more, explicitly or exclusively towards the Western stuff, I understood it better, because they're really on a philosophical level, they're talking about the same thing. It's just their way of dealing, the working out of the cosmological, soteriological dilemma is just different. But the underlying, like, what this is and what we believe about it is I mean, it's exactly the same thing.
Definitely. And so in regards to existence, there's this concept of negative existence and the 3 veils of negative existence. Maybe you can shed some light on those a little bit.
Sure. Essentially, so the 3 veils of negative existence, that is a term that's an idea that comes out of many versions of Kabbalism. I believe it's out of the Zohar, actually, that is taken from the Zohar. But it's developed, right? You've got 3. So you have the tree of life, and the tree of life embodies everything that exists and therefore can change, even Keter. I would say Keter is the most changeless, but even Keter is not. Kether's the monad. Kether is not negative. Kether is 1, and so the negative existence are the 3 veils that are above Keter, that are called Ein Sof and Ein Sof Or, which is nothing, and then sort of like unchangeable or unbreakable nothing, or limitless nothing, and then Ein Sof Or, the addition of or being light, makes it like limitless, unchangeable, or unbreakable light, which is interesting, because we're constantly seeing it referred to, the creative substrate of everything is constantly being referred to as light, like in every tradition. But so that comes from, and I don't care who is willing to debate me about otherwise, because it's just not there. That comes from Hellenized Judaism, because it's directly Neoplatonic. Plotinus talked about this before it was anywhere in Judaism. That's a fact, according to the historical record. Now, the whole idea of Qabalah is that it's an oral tradition and it was never written down until Moses de Leon did it in the Middle Ages in Toledo, Spain. But you can't prove that. Anybody can say anything. Show me the paper trail for this. Otherwise, let's not try and play the game of who did it first. That's the whole thing for me. I understand in the validity of subjective experience, but if you're going to talk about it as if it's objective, then you've lost me, because that's not I, for instance, and I've said on this podcast before, I can have an experience that is objectively true to me, and I'm never going to, because if I can't verify it in some way, it's not worth me talking about with somebody else. That's for me. That's for me to guide my life and my actions. Has nothing to do with me trying to tell you, oh, look, no, you gotta do it this way. I feel strongly about things, don't get me wrong, but we don't have any Qabalah before I want to say the 10th or 11th century. We have Merkaba. We have Merkaba mysticism, which is very, very, it's theurgic Gnosticism. It has the same cosmology as Gnosticism. The mystic would travel in vision to 7 planetary spheres. That's the theurgy right there. That's the Platonic cosmology. And at each one, he would meet an entity, an angel, that was hostile and would try to prevent him from reaching beyond the Ogdoad, the 8th sphere. Again, that's from Plato and Plato's student Eudoxus, right? Eudoxus came up with that idea like the same time that Plato wrote the Myth of in the Republic. It's amazing. It's just an incredible fact. So that entire cosmology literally comes out of the Platonic tradition, and it was the dominant way of looking at the world for about 2,000 years, 1,500 years. Yeah. So Merkaba mysticism, they want to go and behold the throne of God outside the realm of causality, and they have to go through these 8 spheres, and at each of the 7 planetary spheres, they meet an angel that tries to knock them back down. It's fucking Gnosticism. It's theurgic Gnosticism, and they learned all this stuff. This stuff came directly out of the Merkaba literature. Merkaba meaning chariot. It came out of this stuff in Hellenized. The records we have are from Hellenized Egypt. All this stuff was Alexandria, was Egypt, right in that neighborhood. The Gnostic Gospels, the Nag Hammadi codices that include a Platonic tract or 2 Platonic tracts and 2 Hermetic tracts, all found outside of Alexandria, Egypt, 1945. Something was going on there. It's also it's a very early place of the importation of Christianity. But according to legend, or tradition, I should say, the evangelist Mark brought Christianity there in 42 CE. That's very early. That's very early. You don't see that a lot, that Christianity was being brought to major cities like that. I mean, maybe Rome, with St. Peter. But anyway, so they get that idea from Plotinus's 3 hypostases, which is also where the Holy Trinity of Christianity gets its theological basis. Yeah, so you have for Plotinus, he conceived of the absolute as a threefold unity, and it couldn't be otherwise. So you had Tohen, right, the one that was beyond contemplation. It was everything in an empty plenum, an empty fullness, everything in a potential state, and it's unthinkable. It's unthinkable. You cannot think about it. You can't talk about it. The only way to talk about it is by saying what it's not. Because if something is literally everything at the same time, right? Kind of like that eternal now we were talking about. Then you can't call it one thing at all. It's completely undifferentiated. Now he conceived of the divine nous, or intellect, the divine mind. That was an aspect of this, hypostatic trinity that could, it contemplated. It was the aspect of the absolute that contemplated the forms inherent inside the one. So if the one was everything in undifferentiated potential, the divine nous contemplated each of those things, giving them form. And then the psyche, the third hypostases was soul. And it wasn't an individual soul. It was more so the overarching archetype of soul, psyche cosmos, the soul of the world and of the universe. And that essentially objectified those images and moved towards them in an act of desire. And that is how the soul falls into materiality. And then you see Tertullian, the early church father and Neoplatonist. He was trained in Neoplatonism. I believe he studied with Ammonius Saccas. I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head, but I know he was a Neoplatonist. He invents or imports the doctrine of the Holy Trinity. He calls it tres personae una substantia, 3 persons, 1 substance. Pulls that directly out of Platinian philosophy. So this is how these ideas have penetrated through time. They exist. You got a lot of scholars that'll get super granular and say, I'm going to give, well, right now, just so you're aware and everybody else that might be listening, I'm going to give probably the worst analogy you've ever heard, and you're going to chuckle, but it's fucking true. The thing about scholars is that they dial in at such a fucking granular level because they have to. Their papers don't get supported unless, like, you need to be that weird kid who listens. Like, it's like, yeah, okay, you there's some people who listen to rock, there's some people who listen to like R&B, and then there's like the kid who listens to like German fucking marching band music from the 1800s, and then there's somebody who just listens to like Swedish fucking sea mammals playing like clown horns. Like, that's what you have to be in academia to write a fucking paper that anyone cares about. You have to be the most obscure son of a bitch, because it's like, we've covered it all. We've covered everything. There's no fucking stone that's unturned anymore. So it's like, yeah, I'm going to write about this particular style of like chair feet that they were making in fucking Denmark, for 3 hours in 1934. It's like, and you got to write papers on that shit. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And what they do, what they do is they take a fucking, right? This is the terrible analogy. At least that one was funny. This one won't be. You take a fucking sausage, right? You know what this thing is. It's a unified thing. Granted, it's got different parts. It's got the skin, it's got the interior, all this stuff. But it's the overarching definition, the archetype, sausage, right? And they just keep cutting it into smaller fucking pieces. And they cut it into smaller pieces. It's like, and you get the end over here. Well, this one has a slightly different shape, so this might not be sausage. Because if this one over here is sausage and it doesn't have the same contour, then they shouldn't be related. But if, and it's like, guys, like, this is dehumanizing. It's funny, but it's fucking dehumanizing. This is what we exist in, a world of fucking confusion, because like, we're obsessed with taking that kind of thinking as far as we can, pushing the fucking envelope of discursive positivism, and granular, hyper-granularity in our exegesis and our examination of things, to the point where you can't tell the forest from the fucking trees. And people are wondering, like it's, everything is breaking down because of this. Like, there has to be some semblance of like, okay, come back, look at it, right? Really look at it. It's one fucking thing. There's of course there's differences. We live in the material universe. Like, things change, people change, they morph, but like, there is some overarching like arche there's an arche, the Greeks would call it. There's a foundational archetype to it that is constantly expressing what it is. And though the exterior presentation may differ, it's still expressing like this internal telos, this unity. And when you constantly zoom in so that you're looking at things so microscopically that you've completely lost the picture, that's why we end up in this place. And I feel very passionate about that, because there's some brilliant fucking people whose like their talents are kind of wasted, if you ask me. But you could be doing great fucking work if you pull your head out of this gigantic academic ass.